Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. Rob is off today. I am running solo, but looking forward to today's show. I think I got an interesting topic to get into. Before we get the show started, I should remind you good folks that I will be back out on the road again soon enough. My lower back is dreading it, but I will be in San Diego back at the American Comedy Company May 1st through 3rd. This is one of my favorite clubs in the freaking country, so really looking forward to the shows out there. Not so much the plane ride, but the shows I'm very much looking forward to. And then after that, I will be for the first time ever at the Skyline Comedy Club in Appleton, Wisconsin. It's my first time I'm ever going to Appleton, so really looking forward to that. comicdavesmith.com is the website. If you want to go grab tickets, please head over there. And then next up after that is the big one, is Comedy Works in Denver. Really looking forward to that one as well. It's got a bunch of dates for the rest of the year. Robbie the Fire Bernstein will be with me on all of those shows. So if you want to come see the two of us, please do. It's really a lot of fun, and I love I really love going on the road with Rob and meeting a lot of you guys who listen to the show. Okay, so I wanted to on today's episode, and maybe if we have time, I'll get into a couple other things. But I wanted to talk about this. So Jordan Peterson did the Joe Rogan Experience yesterday, and it came out yesterday. Maybe they did it 2 days ago, but there was a point that or like a little mini rant that he went on that kind of was hitting on a lot of the topics that we've been talking about. Of course, you know, like it hit on specifically hit on the debate I had with Douglas Murray. It also just, you know, became a comment on this broader theme of like, you know, the collapse of the legacy media and the rise of the podcast scene, and, you know, all of these things. And I thought it was kind of interesting, and I wanted to kind of respond to it and go over some of the ideas that he put forward. And I should say at the beginning of this, I posted a tweet earlier today on this topic, but I should say that so I do have immense respect for Jordan Peterson, and I think he is absolutely brilliant, like an incredibly intelligent individual. And I always thought that he was, particularly during his rise, I thought that he was one of, if not the most important cultural intellectual figures. And his stuff on his book Maps of Meaning was phenomenal. I thought his whole rise to fame around, I guess it was around 2017-ish, where he was kind of standing up to the most insane excesses of woke college insanity was, I mean, like, to say it was important would be a huge understatement. It was crucial. He was like a critical voice. I would not want to replay the last 10 years and like run an experiment with no Jordan Peterson there. I think things turn out much worse if it wasn't for this guy. And while I've often disagreed with him on political issues, and if I'm being quite frank, I always felt that he was a much more powerful force as a Jungian psychologist who was commenting on culture and meaning in life. I always felt that when he got into politics, it was where he always stumbled, and where it unfortunately at times, I think, took away from his legacy. You know, and that's not to say that he's always wrong when he's talking about politics. I mean, there's been things that I think he's really nailed. And he's done podcasts on economics and on cryptocurrency and on Misesian economics, and I thought were really phenomenal. But it is where the political realm is where he ended up getting a lot of things wrong, like fallen for the COVID nonsense for a bit, or foreign policy, things like that. And it's a shame in a way to me. Like, I wish he had never gone to the Daily Wire, and I wish he had stayed there, but okay, whatever. That's just me. Anyway, because I do have enormous respect for Jordan Peterson, and because I know his views on Israel, and I know that he works at the Daily Wire right now, I was, and also just knowing what's been going on over the last few weeks, when I saw he was on, I was like, well, there's no way this didn't come up. So let me buckle myself, for what Dr. Peterson's going to throw at me. So I was somewhat pleasantly surprised that that was not how it went, and that he just gave, he gave me a compliment in passing, and then talked about the other stuff he was going to say. So anyway, I was a little bit, just full disclosure here, as I like to be honest with my audience, I was a little bit relieved about that. But then he went on to make a point that I did, I found a bit concerning. And so I wanted to play this clip and kind of give my thoughts on it, because I think I think there's something important that Jordan is missing here, and I think it's important for people to be aware of it. And so with the audience I got, I'm going to do my best to try to make that happen. So let's start the clip, and then I'll jump in when I feel it necessary.
And so this is like, I can really see this starting to happen on the right. Like, I've been tracking psychopathic behavior on the right for probably 4 years, something like that, especially on the anti-Semitic side, because that's really where it reared its head first. And there's nothing more annoying than a successful minority. Right. Now, that's part of it. And I'm going to I might as well get myself in trouble right away, too.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
this is a real subject.
Well, so it's a real terrible subject.
It's interesting because if you don't criticize it enough, you're compromised. If you criticize, it's like, when it comes to anti-Semitism, like, it's one of those things where you can't separate. It's a religion, and it's also a race, and it's also a government.
Mm-hmm.
That's where things get weird.
Right.
And then there's also the concept of intelligence agencies and compromise that also gets attached to it, the manipulation of world markets and money, and there's a lot to unpack. And then there's regular Jewish people. Nothing to do.
Well, the Jews, too, they're very successful.
Yeah.
And so what you would expect from a purely statistical point of view is you'd expect them to be overrepresented at the extreme.
They're also a walled garden, right?
Meaning
it's very difficult to join. They don't proselytize. They don't try to get you to join. Right. And they're all very tightly knit. They call themselves the Klan. They're all like locked in. The Jewish Klan, not KKK. The problem with that term has been compromised by the Ku Klux Klan. But I mean it as terms of tribe.
Well, community.
Yeah, community. They're very tight knit. Obviously, of Nazi Germany in Eastern Europe, you have.
All right, hold on. Can you pause it for a second, Natalie?
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah,
is it all choppy for you?
All these complex things are.
Okay, so just like a couple thoughts on what was said so far. So, and maybe I'll hold off on this second point until a little bit later in the clip. Oh, okay, let me say this. So there's, Jordan Peterson is talking about paying attention to psychotic behavior on the right, and that's fair, fair enough. I mean, I certainly see a lot of this all over the place. We could kind of get back into that in a second. I do think that, like, if you're going to attempt to do this, to tackle the idea of anti-Semitism on the internet, I suppose is what we're talking about here. I'm not sure really where else people are claiming it's happened, or college protests or something like that. At least that's where people claim it happens. I think it's important to, if you want to get into this and you want to come on Joe Rogan's show and start kind of pushing back against this. And I've said this for many years now. And again, for whatever it's worth, not that it matters, but I'm Jewish, and I don't like Jew hatred. And so, okay, it's fine to bring this up and try to smack it down. I think there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But I do think you're going to be coming from a very weak position. Like, again, this is it's kind of true for any group. If you really want to take them down, I think what you're going to have to do is address what their issues are. And I feel like sometimes people are afraid to do this. This has always come very natural to me. And I've never bought into the argument that you can't do this because it could, create fertile ground for some type of hatred or something. But almost every dissident group, every radical group, they almost always have they have a list of grievances. Almost always some of them are reasonable. Almost always some of them are not. It's a fairly simple statement, but it's almost always the case. Now, I suppose there could be exceptions where that's not the case. But if you're going to take them on, then I think the way to do that is to admit the legitimate grievances that they have and then point out the error of their ways. I think Joe gets much closer to this here than Jordan does. And there's, to say that Jews are highly successful, I mean, that is true, but that's also true for other minority groups where you don't see this rise in distrust or hatred or whatever you want to call it. There's, Asian Americans are killing it. And there's lots of subgroups within Asian Americans who are just doing really great, far better than the native population, far better than American white people. And in fact, this was always one of the go-to talking points against people who were arguing with woke leftists back years ago when that used to happen, before they were totally discredited. But they would say, hey, we live in a white supremacist society. And then some right winger or some conservative would say, well, if we live in a white supremacist society, why, what's the evidence of that? And they'd say, well, white people make more money. They have higher net worths. They have higher, whatever, higher education, all these things. And they'd say, okay, but Indians beat white people. So then aren't we an Indian supremacist country? This would always be that. But yet over this last 18 months or so, nobody is really claiming that we've seen a dramatic rise in anti-Asian hate. And there's even there's other subgroups in America that are doing very, very well. And so to just look at that, isolating that one cause doesn't seem to really tell us much of anything. And then at the same time, over these last 18 months, you've seen this horrific military onslaught in Gaza that is being completely funded and armed and propped up by our country. This is something that crosses both political parties, right? Joe Biden initiated the policy. Donald Trump is continuing the policy. It's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It is like a third rail that you are, I know people like to nitpick. I'm going to say you're not allowed to talk about it. I shouldn't say you're not allowed to talk about it, but let's just say there is a steep penalty to talking about it. And for many, many years before the rise of the podcast scene, he's just simply nobody was just going to talk about it. It was just you're gone. You're not allowed to do that anymore. I don't know how anyone could look at this and not think that that's at the heart of the matter here, or at least a major, major contributing factor to what's going on. And so I'm just saying, if you want to take on people for being anti-Semitic, I don't really think you're actually even engaging in that conversation if you just say, oh, they're successful and everybody's jealous of them. I mean, even within the people, even within the community of people who you would put into that category, there is, there's you would hear all the time, if you listen to them, talking about how overrepresented Jewish people are in banking and media. You hear a lot made of pornography, these different areas. I've never once heard any of the Jew haters make a big deal about how Jews are overrepresented in dentistry. Now, they also are overwhelmingly overrepresented in dentistry. And you make pretty good living being a good dentist, you're probably going to make, I'd guess, like 5 times the, median household income. Okay. So why don't we hear a lot of complaints about that? Because it's, dentistry is not hurting our society. They're just kind of fixing people's cracked tooths, and then they're happy that they got their tooth fixed. And so they go like, I'm just making the point that like, there is some other element to this here now. And if you're going to be, disproportionately involved in banking, disproportionately involved in media, disproportionately involved in war making, you can see where that's going to lead to more of a hatred of your group. Now, I still think that's hatred is irrational, and for the exact reasons that Joe laid out. It's like, well, what are we talking about when we talk about Jews? Are you talking about a religion or a people or a government or, figures that are very powerful within our government? And then, as Joe correctly says, and then there's just regular people. There's just regular people who have nothing to do with any of that. Now, of course, on some level, like, this is the logical conclusion of this is just like that individualism should win out the day. People are innocent or guilty as individuals based on their actions, not based on their collective group. However, when you're talking about these things, you do tend to understand that, unfortunately, that's not the way that most human beings interact with the world. Now, it's by our very nature that we're pattern recognizing creatures, and that can be good, and that also can be bad. And it's very dangerous. And I think that a lot of the people who fall into this camp do have a tendency to start with their conclusion. And that's the problem with pattern recognition. You can't just, it's like feminists could sit there and say like, we live in a, patriarchal, sexist society that oppresses women. And then they go, well, look, as evidence of this, 90% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are men. And it's like, okay, but you're starting with your conclusion and then working backward, because that doesn't really prove anything about how our society is male dominated. It certainly doesn't. It's the Fortune 500 CEOs is not a comment on what life is like for men. It's a comment on what life is like for 500 men. The top 500 men, like, this is your average guy, has absolutely nothing to do with that. And so I think there's a similar thing there. There's a similar argument that you can make with Jewish people. And there's like, whatever you think about the government of Israel or the Israel lobby's influence on the American government, whatever you think about what's happening to the people in Gaza, like, that really does have nothing to do with Barry the accountant who lives down the street. And like, it's insane to hold him responsible in some way for that. Okay, like, I do think that is the correct answer. But at the same time, if you lived in a neighborhood and like a large black population moved in and they started committing like rapes and assaults and murders at wildly disproportionate rates, and then you saw a rise in anti-black racism, I don't think I would look at that and say like, geez, I cannot put together what's going on here. Like, I do not see one thing as being a major factor in the other. Now, obviously, it's still in that situation very unfair to just blame some black dude who moved in who didn't kill or rape or rob anybody. Like, okay, you could be against that too. But if we're going to have a conversation about why there's this rise in racism here, you're probably going to have to address the elephant in the room.
One of the things I was trying to figure out when I was watching that is certainly didn't walk away from it with that idea in mind. But then underneath all that, I thought there's a really unbelievably tricky problem here. And I think that's why it's made it poked up into, well, you also set that conversation up, but it's manifest in that conversation. The psychopathic pretenders. And it's even worse now. And then make a barrier, right? Now, the right was calling for the left to do that for decades, and they didn't, and they couldn't. And the left is not good at drawing barriers, partly temperamentally. The right is somewhat better, but there's no shortage of monstrosity there. And so then the question is, how do you draw the line? And that's kind of what I was, because I've been watching these right-wing, they're not right-wing, these psychopathic types manipulate the edge of the conservative movement for
Right.
their own gain.
Right.
And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guys. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well,
but
particularly now.
yes, particularly now.
Right.
And so, you've let your curiosity guide you, your curiosity and your desire for knowledge, this quest.
Okay, here let's
You
pause it
let
here.
that guide you as a podcaster. And by the way, I'm trying to work through exactly.
All right. So, all right, let me give my thoughts on this. So, first of all, I do, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of the show, I did appreciate that. I thought it was like a nice gesture that he said that he went, I watched your discussion. I thought all three of you guys did a very good job. I looked at it like, could I have done any better? And I didn't leave feeling like I could have. That was a kind gesture of him. I appreciate that. As I said before, that is as good as I could possibly hope for from a Daily Wire employee to say about that specific debate. Now, leaving aside the fact that nobody in the world thinks that, there's nobody who thinks that both me and Douglas did a really good job in this debate, but whatever, that's fine. It was nice enough that he said that. But I thought that this next kind of section that he goes to of saying you guys were navigating very difficult water, and that, there's this problem of keeping the psychopaths out. And then it's almost seems the way he's putting it that's like synonymous with anti-Semitism, prejudice against Jews and being a psychopath are the same thing or something like that. I'm not saying he exactly makes that claim, but it's like that's the group he's concerned when it comes to psychopaths. And here, this is my issue that I've always had with this way of looking at things. The Jeff Dice responded to my tweet earlier today, the brilliant Jeff Dice. And I thought he said something along the lines, I'm probably going to butcher this and not say it as well as him, but he said something along the lines of, he goes, gatekeepers have a tendency to confuse the pushback for the push. It was just kind of an interesting thought. Now, the way I look at this, and by the way, this is, as I've said many times before, and I will not stop saying, this is the reason why I hate the term whataboutism. Again, not that there's not ever a scenario where you're just interjecting something that's irrelevant and changing the subject and you want to stay on subject, but so often, the overwhelming majority of the time that I ever see the term whataboutism used, it is essentially to attempt to not allow someone to put something into context. And so, if you're giving a report to the cops and you go, oh yes, I saw this guy punch that guy in the face, and then someone points out yeah, but that guy punched him in the face first. And you go, whataboutism? It's like, no, that's not whataboutism. That's we're talking about exactly what's going on in this conflict. And you kind of can't just look at one side of it. I have no problem ever with anybody having a standard. I mean, I may not exactly agree with everybody's standard, but I certainly have no problem with having a standard. All I'm saying is that you have to apply that standard across the board equally, or do your best to do that. And so what I've seen, and I've seen a lot of this over the last 18 months or so, is that people who are very supportive of what Israel is doing, of Israel's destruction of Gaza, people who support that and who support Israel's government are very quick to point out the kind of dehumanizing bigotry aimed at Jewish people. And again, I'm not saying that there's no, I don't like that. That's about me and my group. I'm not a fan of that, obviously. But I can also recognize that it's well, wait, hold on. What I'm seeing here is a massive attempt on both sides to dehumanize the other side. Okay, so that's the first starting point. It's I saw it today on my Twitter feed, and it's just so funny to me. I just happen to see them, and my Twitter's been blowing up so much, it's just not even fun anymore. You can't follow anything. is I finally starting to understand what it's like for these people who have like really big followings. It's not fun. Twitter, I've said this before, it was the most fun around 50,000 followers. That's when it's at its best. But so I saw it today. I just happened to see it. It's like I saw one and then I hit refresh and then it scrolls up and then I saw another one. And they were like the exact same tweet. And but one about Muslims, one about Jews. That it's just kind of like, they're all bad. You can't trust any of them. We had to destroy them all. There's this effort made all around. And the thing that I have just, I've just noticed this a lot. Like there is a different, in a weird sense, I think we all kind of have our priors and our biases. And I think there's just not nearly the sensitivity to anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-Palestinian bigotry that there is to anti-Jewish bigotry. I mean, I think this is just like undeniably the case. And the amount, like, with you, again, Donald Trump, the president of the United States of America, called Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer Palestinians as an insult, like as an attack. Like you're that. I mean, think about that for a second. Like think about this is the worst thing you could accuse one of the groypers of doing. Like is what the president of the United States did, just on the other side of the coin. Like it'd be the equivalent of getting up there and being like, this guy's a Jew. Like to someone who's not Jewish, but meaning it as an insult. Don't even listen to anything else this guy says. Like you'd be quite surprised to see that. And even when I just say it like that, you just think about how beyond the realm of even comprehension, like beyond it, like if I say that, I go, what would it have been like if in a presidential debate, one of the candidates just looked over at the other one and said, this guy's basically a Jew? You can't even conceive of that being the case. And yet we literally just saw it happen when it was Palestinian, and really wasn't even a big story. Wasn't even like a thing. I made hay out of it. I don't know how many other people did. I think Crystal and Sager over at Breaking Points did, but not too many more. It wasn't like a major news story or nothing. I mean, I see this type of language all over the place. And I think that Darryl Cooper, in his prologue to the World War II series, got it right. He got it right when he was just like, this is like a spirit that animates people. And it's a very evil spirit. It's the spirit that leads to the worst atrocities in human history, where you can like find a way to tell yourself that this entire group of people is just dehumanized. And then once you do that, well, what really are crimes against them? There's not just one side to this. And, it's so like, because you think about it like this, like you're talking about gatekeeping and finding a way to how do we know, who Joe Rogan is supposed to have on and who he's not supposed to have on. And, there's psychopaths out there and you don't want to have any of them on. If we're having a conversation about psychopaths, and Jordan Peterson, who I think it's like, I got to say, I'm a little, for somebody who's like a clinical psychologist, it's kind of throwing this diagnosis out there rather loosely. And I understand that's not technically a diagnosis, but you get my point. I think that it's like, well, let's be really specific. If we're going to do this, let's be really specific and let's not only focus on one side of this issue. Let's look at like the entirety of it. And if we're talking about there being psychopaths who need to be gatekept, explain to me how the people who are advocating that we drop bombs on babies are not like the first candidate for that job. They're not like the first ones we'd look at and be like, how about the people who have advocated for 5 disastrous wars in a row that they all said would go great and all turned into catastrophes and are now advocating for the next one with no sense of humility about the 5 disasters they just advocated for? Does that not rise to the level of being considered? Or is it only when people say mean stuff about Jews on Twitter? Like, listen, like I said, my bias is I don't like the mean stuff about Jews, but I'm just like, I can't be a liar. I can't just be inconsistent on this. And then it's actually much worse than that. It's even much, much worse than that, because it's not just that, like, you have one side who's, like, advocating for bombing the crap out of people, and you're not considering them, or you're not bringing up any of the deal. But it is so much more, like, as I said with the Donald Trump example, it is so much more, it's so much uglier, and there's so much more power behind it. Like, when we're looking for, say, these cluster B psychopathic tendencies, and we're looking at, well, that is one thing to consider for sure, but also, like, there, like, means and power and ability to do the thing are a huge component to it as well. It is quite possible that there were more or as evil people as Adolf Hitler, who just never rose to being the Fuhrer of Germany. Was just some guy, just some poor guy. Maybe he would have killed a whole lot of people if he had had the opportunity, but he just never had the opportunity to. And history does not concern itself as much with that person. We're a bit more concerned with the one who actually became the Fuhrer. You know what I mean? And so there's, like, that matters too. And I do just think that when you're gonna look at a target of, like, who are the bad guys who must be kept out, and you're picking on the pushback, the reactionary movement, and fine, like, you can look at their worst excesses, and there's a lot to critique there. I'm not denying that, but, like, compare to what? And who's really got power behind them? Who's got, like, the force of government policy behind them? And it sure as hell ain't them, And like, as I've said before, at this point now, I've done many public debates on the topic of Israel and Palestine, and I've watched many other public debates, so too many to even remember how many. And I have, in my experience personally, I've had at least two different people who I've debated. Well, three. Okay. I think three people that I've debated have straight up, with no qualifications or qualifiers, with no they've just argued to me that these people have no rights. I mean, said that out loud, explicitly. That's their argument. These Palestinian people have no rights. They're savages. They're less than human. Maybe they wouldn't say the words less than human, but they would say savages. It's a clash of civilization. They're on the wrong. They forfeit all their rights. We have a right to do whatever we want to them. Prominent people have said that, like, we've got, like, you're talking about psychopathic behavior. Nikki Haley was signing the bombs that are about to be dropped on children. I am sorry. That ranks on a different level than a groiper on the internet talking shit to me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry. They're talking shit to me. But I could still sit here and say, like, yeah, this just isn't really that high on the level of concerns. And, like, okay, if after we've dealt with all that other shit and, like, called out all of them, if you want to call out that groiper talking shit to me too, okay, fine. I don't have a problem with that, but, like, it is a little bit wild to scope out the landscape here, to survey the whole landscape, and then come away with, like, I know who the psychopaths are. It's these guys. Make it make sense to me. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is My Patriot Supply. I love this company. Like, I'm sorry. This is just a little bit too nutty for me. And, like, again, there's the what's the guy's name? Randy Fine. I want to say. He's a congressman down in Florida. And he tweeted somebody like, I don't want to butcher exactly what it was, but it was something pretty close to being this bad. Like someone sent him, like on Twitter, because he's like a very pro-Israel guy and supports the destruction of Gaza, as if someone sent him like a picture of like a dead baby in Gaza. And he like responded by being like, great, let's see some more. Like, holy shit. Now can you imagine if someone had said that about like one of the dead people on October 7th? It was a sitting member of Congress. Can you imagine the shitstorm? I mean, like if Ilhan Omar utters the words "from the river to the sea," that'll be national news. But looking at a dead child and being like, great. And that guy got an endorsement from the president of the United States a couple days after that. Talk about dehumanizing bigotry. I mean, all right. There's some competition going around here. And again, like, one of them are actually going like there's just something. If you were teleported, and I know people will say this is like idiots will say this is like a lefty argument or something like that, but it's really not. It's just a human argument, and it's very it's just obviously that power has something to do with this. Has something to do with this equation, and who is being oppressed has something to do with this equation. And a lot of times, and this is one of the very unfortunate things in this kind of post woke world that we're living in, is that critical race theory, which is retarded, genuinely is just very, very stupid theory. Like, it's really, really dumb. You can't believe intellectuals ever like even allowed this to develop the way it did. But because the claim of critical race theory is that all of the world is seen through oppressor versus oppressed, and that every human interaction must be an oppressor versus an oppressed. Now, that's very stupid because it's not true, and it completely ignores win-win relationships, which happen all around us. All around us. Romantic relationships are win-win relationships. Friendships are typically, unless they're like, toxic, but generally speaking, they certainly can be win-win relationships. Market transactions tend to be win-win relationships. Literally I always think about this because my dumb, autistic libertarian brain, but I always think I love every thank you moment that you ever have. I literally had one with Natalie the other day. Where we were here, it's like we finished the show and whatever, we leave. She was like editing it together to get it ready, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna run upstairs, blah blah blah, So and I went, thank you, and she goes, thank you, because that's what a win-win relationship is. We're voluntarily in this relationship. Like, I need a good producer. She wants the job. We're both working together. There's not an oppressor or oppressed here. Like, that's just not okay. So critical race theory is stupid. However, it's equally stupid to pretend that nobody's ever oppressed and nobody's ever the oppressor. And so, like, you get this a lot. If you ever say, like, oh, this group is oppressed, now people go, oh, you sound like you're critical race theory. It's like, no, dummy, you don't know what you're talking about. And so, like, if you were to take a time machine and go back to, 1820, and you were sitting around a room with like a slave owner, and him and his buddies, who are all slave owners, were just talking about how stupid black people are and how they're not human and how you could do whatever you want to them and all that. You might have a certain feeling about that and how disgusting that is. And if you then went to the slave quarters and they were sitting around talking about how terrible white people are and how white people are garbage and blah blah blah, while you may not agree with it, you might have a slightly different feeling about their bigotry. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a little bit different to like be the group who's being dumped on versus the one doing the dumping and also being racist. It's just different. And so I do, and this is just my own view on this, I do find it to be substantially more disturbing to be spreading this like dehumanization of the Palestinians while they are just getting fucked up. Like, there's something more disturbing to me about that level of bigotry while they are just getting so goddamn slaughtered. I just, so for that reason, like, it's like, what's actually going on, who actually has the power, and who actually is exhibiting the most psychotic behavior here. You would think that would come into it to some degree, although it doesn't. All right, let's keep playing from the clip, and I'll probably have some more to respond to.
The same sort of thing. How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for? Do you have a conceptual system worked out for that? Like, because
what do you mean? In what way?
Well,
how do I look for in terms of people to talk to?
Yeah. Because you have this insanely immense platform, and you're inviting people onto it. And, you know, you said to Douglas, and I know this to be true, that you're not really thinking about the outcome exactly. You're thinking about, this is an interesting person to talk to, and I'd like to go on that quest. But then you have the additional conundrum. We're trying to work this out in the Daily Wire side of things too. Not to say that that's exactly the same situation. It's like, once you gain in reach and authority, then how do you know that? How do you take great care that the people you're talking to aren't, what would you say, eliciting or feeding a subculture? Yeah, that's right. That hasn't got the proper aims. Like, I guess the legacy media probably worked that out by having people, mediators, right? And guests. And that was also back when we could rely on the structures of authority in some sense to filter. And now we're in this helter-skelter world where everything is
the legacy media is the worst at that now.
Yeah, I know.
They're the worst. I know, which is fascinating. You know, it really is. It's really fascinating when.
Yeah. The okay. So one thing here that I think at a different section, Joe did kind of address. Like, he brought it up, but I don't think that the conversation really stayed there for that long, if I'm remembering correctly. But, you know, again, I just think, like, all of these, the kind of like assumptions that are built into some of the, you know, the worldview that Jordan is espousing here, I think are perhaps incorrect. And one of them is that the legacy media used to have a system of doing this so that we could trust them. I think that a much more accurate way to look at it is that they were never trustworthy. And I think part of, like, don't get me wrong, because there are, as Jordan correctly said, there are many variables here. And part of what's happened is, like, there's like a whole bunch of things that have happened at once. Number one, there's been a tremendous atrophy amongst the American elites. We just do not, I mean, the group of elites that have had large amounts of power over the last 15 to 20 years are a truly unimpressive group. And we produced much more impressive elites in previous generations. Also, at the same time, and related to that, the country has been spinning out of control in many different ways. What you can look at, of course, the debt and the prolonged wars, and the insane COVID response, and the debasing of the currency. And there's much more. I think there are many more existential problems. Not that there weren't some in the past, but all of this happened with the rise of the technology that allowed for this massive decentralized kind of media movement. And so now people are almost at the point where they go like, all right, well, they've been lying about us about everything for the last decade. Maybe they've been lying about everything for the last 20 years. maybe the last 25 years. But, you know, like in your mind somewhere, you're like 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that's when you could trust Edward R. Murrow and all these guys. But I don't actually think that's the case. I think that back then we just had slightly more impressive elites. They had the media apparatus locked down, and the American people were much more gullible. And we were less at risk. We were America. We were on top of the world. It's just, what are you going to do? Complain about this? No, the economy is going pretty good. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Tax Network USA. Tax day may have passed, but for millions of Americans, the real trouble is just beginning. If you missed the April 15th deadline or still owe back taxes, the IRS is ramping up enforcement. Every day you wait only makes things worse. With over 5,000 new tax liens filed daily and tools like property seizures, bank levies, and wage garnishments, the IRS is applying pressure at levels we haven't seen in years. Increased administrative scrutiny means collections are moving fast. The good news, there's still time for Tax Network USA to help. Self-employed or business owner, even if your books are a mess, they've got it covered. Tax Network USA specializes in cleaning up financial chaos and getting you back on track fast. Even after the deadline, it's not too late to regain control. Your consultation is completely free, and acting now could stop penalties, threatening letters, and surprise levies before they escalate. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Smith. You may have missed April 15th, but you haven't run out of options. Let Tax Network USA help before the IRS makes their next move. Once again, tnusa.com/Smith. All right, let's get back into the show. But look, I mean, look, we were, and this is at this point, I mean, this isn't even controversial. This has all just been declassified and known. We were lied into World War I. Okay, we were lied into the Vietnam War. We're like, there were massive, like organized propaganda campaigns to lie the American people into certain policies. And that these, I'm just pulling out a few wars. I mean, there are so many examples of just like crazy shit that the CIA was doing, that people in the government were doing, that went completely uncovered by that old corporate media apparatus. And so I think that that's not who I'd look to as like who figured out the example of, you know, how to gatekeep. But I will say that it's interesting to me to see a lot of the people. I want to try to say this as carefully as I can without. Okay. A lot of the people who were the champions of free speech, at least this is what they always said when they were arguing with the social justice warrior types. They were the champions of free speech. They opposed the gatekeepers. They opposed labeling people as bigots, certainly like in this collective manner. They were fine at the end of COVID, not at the beginning. But at the end of COVID, they were fine with saying, like, to hell with the expert class, to hell with gatekeepers. They got everything wrong. You should be questioning all of this stuff. But again, I'm not trying to be a dick here, but none of them were actually good on COVID when it mattered. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think any of these guys were. Joe was fucking heroic the whole goddamn time. But okay, leaving that aside. But now the ones telling him about how he's got to gatekeep, they actually get like, what have you gotten right? You know, now that's not Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson got a lot of things right, particularly culturally, spiritually, in terms of the role of masculinity, a lot of that stuff. But like, I don't know. He's also gotten like a lot of the, you know, like a lot of political things wrong. I mean, he got COVID wrong. He was saying that Kavanaugh should step down when the accusations first came out, and then they turned out to be complete bullshit. And like, maybe you're not in a position to dictate who should be gate kept out. I certainly wouldn't like put myself in that position of being like, look, here's what you got to do, Joe. I have never, in all of the conversations that me and Joe Rogan have ever had, I have never once even dreamt to have the nerve to be like, well, let's talk about who you're having on the show and who you're not having on the show. It's like, Jesus. It just kind of seems to me like the problem that the Daily Wire is having, as he says over there, it seems like the problem that all these guys are having is that, oh shit, this whole thing we've been advocating for this whole time, this whole free speech and, an end of censorship and an end to whatever, all this stuff. Oh shit, it's resulted in some very compelling critics of Israel getting big platforms. That seems to me what the beef is. Because really, if we're talking about anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, or as Jordan Peterson specifically mentioned by name, I think not in this clip, but at a different portion, specifically mentioned the Groypers by name. Okay, well, Joe's never had any of them on. What are we actually talking about here? Joe's never had Nick Fuentes on. He's never had a Groyper on his show. He's had these other guys on. But you're kind of using them as an example to kind of have this struggle session with Joe about what standards he has for having a guest on. And this just, to me, seems like a very similar tactic to all of the stuff that Jordan Peterson so heroically stood against. And I'm not quite sure why we're even having this conversation right now. I mean, like, I think Joe's standard is working just fine. Granted, I'm a little biased in this department, but I think his standard is working just fine. He has people on who he thinks interesting and compelling and has interesting conversations with them. And by the way, he's had a lot of people who support Israel on the show. He's had a lot of people who support the effort in Ukraine on the show. He's also had some people who are very critical of both on the show. I don't know. And I also don't think the ratio has to be 1-to-1 or anywhere near close to that. I think he had a lot more pro-Trump people than pro-Kamala people on the show, but who the fuck cares? Oh, and also none of these people care about that. None of them care about that because they agreed with the message. So it just seems, again, if we're going to say this, just make the standard objective and then hold it across the board. I don't think that's too much to ask for. Now, the other point that I'll make, and just to be very clear, I'm not accusing Jordan Peterson of doing this. I don't think he's doing this exactly. It does seem like some of the other ones are flirting with this. And I watched my buddy Clint Russell's podcast the other day, and Clint Russell is the host of Liberty Lockdown, which is a phenomenal show, and I love Clint very dearly. He's a very good friend of mine. I mean, I think he's a very smart guy, and his show is excellent. So I watched his show, and he was like covering the same stuff that I've covered over the last few episodes of the Douglas Murray article and the Konstantin Kassin article, and his angle on it, which was a little bit different than mine, was like, oh, this is a straight up cancellation attempt of Dave Smith. Like, they're trying to cancel this guy. And while I didn't exactly say that in my responses to both, like, I get his point. And essentially, like, what he was saying was like, well, look, and, go watch the episode for yourself. Maybe I'm butchering this a little bit, but I think the point was something like, he was like, well, look, when you're talking about these standards and these, like only the experts should be here and, all of this, it's like, well, what are you really saying? I mean, you're essentially saying, hey, Joe, don't have Daryl Cooper on anymore. Don't have Dave Smith on anymore. Don't have Ian Carroll on anymore. Now, this is, in its purest sense, advocating censorship. Now, you could say that they're not advocating, at least explicitly, that like the government intervene and decide who's going to be on these shows, and they're not advocating that like the social media companies determine this. But you're still just going one level beneath that and advocating that the host of the show doesn't have these people on. And part of it is that even they know that they can't just turn around and advocate tech censorship because everyone will call them the biggest hypocrites in the world after spending so many years of not doing it. But I wish, like, I don't know if any of you guys noticed this, but I certainly noticed this even when Jordan Peterson's saying it. It's like, this is very vague. Like, what are you actually suggesting? That Joe shouldn't just have conversations with people he finds interesting? What are you advocating that he do here? And then the final thing I'll say about this is that I think that Jordan, the fact that he calls out the Groypers by name and picks them, when, as I've demonstrated throughout this, again, I'm not exactly saying here, I'm not saying that there's nothing to criticize about the Groypers. And I've got a strange relationship with some of them. It's a little bit of a strange situation because some of them have very much appreciated some of the views that I've taken. I think some of them have appreciated some of the ideas that I've been helping to kind of mainstream a little bit. But then again, I'm a Jew, so a bunch of them hate my fucking guts. And their leader, Nick Fuentes, is at this point, I would say I can count on him to trash me anytime I start making waves in any way, which I think is shitty. And so whatever. My dog in the fight isn't like that. I'm trying to defend him and these people. I'm just really, what it comes down to is that I just believe what's right is right, and what's the truth is the truth, and what's fair is fair. And also, like, I'm not, as some other very prominent people seem to be, I'm not what we used to call back in my time, back in the 80s and 90s, I'm not a little bitch. And by the way, that is like, just not being a little bitch is like, that divides all the people into like two even categories that, and then one can kind of be dismissed. But I just like the fact that Nick Fuentes says some mean shit about me is just not as important as the fucking destruction of our country, the destruction of Gaza, the fucking 7 wars that we've fought in the last 20 years. It's not on the level of any of this. So like, who really fucking cares? By the way, I know this triggers the fuck out of some of my Jewish friends, but like, that's how I feel about all this fucking anti-Semitism on Twitter. It's like, yeah, it's comments on Twitter. Who fucking cares? It's just not that important. You could try your best to spin it. By the way, you just sound like a woke leftist when you do. Yeah, but the history, the legacy of slavery, or something. Yeah, what are we actually talking about? What are we actually talking about in the present right now? But I will say that, like, if you're gonna go out there and call them out, if that's your move, then I do think if you want to be effective with that, then maybe you're actually going to have to take on some of their arguments. And I don't agree with a lot of their arguments, but they've got some. And I think if you're going to call them out like that, maybe you should address them. Maybe that's the way to do this. I also think there's something, particularly for me, as somebody who's followed Jordan Peterson's work and, again, really admired so much of it. It would occur to me that while, and again, I don't wish to strawman Jordan Peterson on this issue, but while he is kind of sloppily, a little bit, just throwing out these labels of like, cluster B, psychopaths, narcissists, all these things, I would argue that it is very, very difficult to make any of these diagnoses on a group of people on the internet that you do not know, you have not met. I mean, like, in a professional capacity, Jordan Peterson would never diagnose any individual in this group until he had several sessions with them individually. But it does just occur to me that perhaps a lot of those people are the exact disenfranchised young men who Jordan Peterson was supposed to be the champion of. And for so many years put his neck out there and said, no, society is like leaving these people behind. And they're people too. And, this was one area that, like, it's gotten me in, a bit of trouble. I mean, I don't know, like back to like when Clint was saying that there's like a cancellation attempt against me. I'm kind of in a position, at least right now. There was a time when I was more worried about that. Maybe I'm being naive. I'm not too worried about it right now. I don't think it's like, we're in this new world and like Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson love me. So I don't really think I'm getting canceled anytime soon. Maybe I'm wrong, but like, I'm not really that concerned about that. But so I don't want to I'm just saying, like, I've gotten a lot of flack, let's say, over the years for having this attitude. And I think this was one of the things that Jordan Peterson, that was so great about him, because of course he's a lot smarter than me. And so he could put this in a much more eloquent and profound way than I'll be able to. But part of my attitude in dealing with all types of different people. I mean, I've done this with all types of different groups, leftists, socialists, all types of different groups. But the one that's caught me flack has been with like the alt-right, the groypers, the kind of the people who some might call anti-Semites or racists or whatever term. I try not to use these terms because I want to use like a term that they'd agree with, but maybe that just, as a placeholder. One of the attitudes that I've always had is that these guys are people too. I don't have to agree with them on everything. I could even think there's some really ugly implications to some of the things they believe. By the way, I feel that about socialists too. And in fact, I think a lot of people would die if the socialists were to get some of the policies that they want. But I could still speak to socialists and recognize that's a human being. We have a difference of agreement here. Let's discuss it. Let's see what of your grievances, what I think is a reasonable one and what I think is an unreasonable one, what I think is misguided. And I just think of all people, for Jordan Peterson to kind of like, at least, I'm not saying exactly he did this, but at least he gave the appearance of kind of casting this aspersion across this wide group of people who I think are, like many of them are the people who grew up under the regime that you made your career fighting and ultimately defeating. I don't think the correct move here is to now take on the tone of saying they're the deplorables, they must be kept out, they must be kept out of here on a show that's never had any of them on to begin with. It's like you're just taking shots at them while they're completely powerless. Okay, I mean, there's some of them who got some following on Twitter or whatever, but like, really, in the greater scheme of things, is that the issue? And is this the way? Like, what are we trying to do here? Like, you're the clinician, not me. What are we trying to do here? Are you trying to like bridge a gap here? Are you trying to like see if some of these people are redeemable? Are you trying to like give them something to think about that they haven't before? Or are you just trying to tell society to shun them? As Jordan Peterson once said, what's so bad about speaking up for the marginalized? All right, I'm going to wrap on that. And I'm sure that last part will earn me a fair bit of grief too. Okay, thank you guys very much for listening. We'll be back. Members only episode tomorrow. The members only. That means you got to join. You got to go to partoftheproblem.com and sign up, and then you get the members only episode every Thursday. And for the rest of you, we'll see you back here on Monday. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Well, welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I'm Dave Smith. He is Robbie the Fire Bernstein. Thank you for joining us at a little bit earlier than normal. How are you doing today, Rob?
I am doing well, and you got a busy day. You got all sorts of shows lined up.
I do. Well, I filled in for Sagar and Jetty this morning on Breaking Points and co-hosted it with Crystal Ball.
Yeah, you already had a full day.
I did that first thing in the morning. They're a morning show, I'm all up early anyway. So these days, I'm not naturally a morning person, but these kids, they really force you to be. But it was a lot of fun. I think that should be, as you guys are listening now, that should be up. They put it up, I think, on their site first, much like kind of the way we do it. They put it up on their site and then it's out on YouTube later. But it was really fun. I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, go check that out. And then of course, tomorrow is the big debate. So I will be debating at the Soho Forum. I'm making my return to the Soho Forum, which was my kind of feels like a homecoming. I miss those guys. So looking forward to that. Of course, Robbie the Fire Bernstein will be there opening up the show with some comedy. So some comedy, a debate, and then an after party over at Jane Epstein's place. So looking forward to that. And then
of course,
Rob,
Porch Tour dates, everybody.
Yeah.
Check out the Run Your Mouth podcast, and of course, porchtour.com this weekend in DC, Jersey, and Virginia Beach. Come hang out, and then next weekend a bunch of Texas dates. And if you go to porchtour.com, I am everywhere this summer. You name a city, I'm probably visiting it. So go to porchtour.com and grab those tickets.
Hell yeah, go see. And I have consistently heard nothing but great things about the Porch Tour. So make sure you go on out to one of those if they're near you. And then, of course, me and Rob will also be on tour together. comicdavesmith.com for all of those ticket links. Our next stop is Salt Lake City in Utah, partying with the Mormons, where they mess with don't they mess with the beer there or something like that, right, Rob? Doesn't the beer have less alcohol in it?
Yep, they have lower DUI limits, and their typical beers, I think, like a Budweiser is 5%, and there it's like 4.2 or something stupid like that.
You're just making me drink more beer, Utah. It's not.
I think you can get normal beers, but it's like your typical Budweiser, your typical Miller Lite, all of that's been downgraded just a little bit for no reason.
I was talking to
and all
guy.
Those moms are popping pills anyway. So how's that working out for you?
Oh
Mormons?
yeah. No, it's all ridiculous. But listen, we like the Mormons. But it's the alcohol thing we really got to talk about. As I was talking to this guy who owns like a couple dispensaries out here in Jersey, and I thought, I don't know, it was interesting. He was telling me this, so I didn't know this, but evidently in New York, you can sell edibles that like whatever dosage, you can get like 10 milligrams or 50 milligrams or 100 milligrams or whatever the THC count in it is. But in Jersey, it's legal. You can have the businesses, but you can only sell 10 milligram edibles. You can't sell any more than that. And so he was telling me this is like the rule in Jersey. That of course, I thought kind of obvious follow-up question. I was like, but can't people just eat more of the gummies? And he was like, oh yeah. No, that's what everybody does. And then it was just like a great little example of like government rules and how stupid they are. But so he goes, oh, my father is on chemo. He goes, and the gummies really help him. Like they really help with his appetite and his sleep, and just like not feeling so shitty. And he goes, but he's also diabetic. And now he's got to eat 5 of these gummies instead of 1 of them. So he's still doing it. He's still eating the 50 milligrams. So anyway, I don't know. It's just like, for some reason, it reminded me of that with the lowering the alcohol level in beer. Like, it's like, is someone who has a problem just going to be like, too bad. I really would have liked a little bit more alcohol, but they only put so much in beer. You're just going to have another beer. You're just making people fatter. That's what all of this does. It just makes people fatter and equally as impaired as they otherwise would be. But, government's bad at everything. Okay, so for today's episode, I did think it made sense to get into this. I guess I've been doing more like response episodes lately than we typically do, but I do think they're kind of necessary and they seem to get very good numbers. So whatever. I don't know if this one's going to be quite as juicy as some of the other characters, but Mark Levin did go off partially on me. I think it was more on Tucker Carlson, but
and these
it's
Jewish anti-Semites.
Yes, it's a real problem with Jewish. I am the Jewish face of anti-Semitism or whatever. I've taken the Larry Elders title and morphed it a little bit, but it's kind of hard. Number one, I mean, I'm responding to people who are influential people and they're talking about issues that are the issues that we talk about, and I guess just because over the last month my profile's been a bit higher than it ever has before, it's just been more often the case that I personally am involved in this. But it's really not and I mean this, it's not about me. It's about what matters. It's about the argument that's being made here, and it has been. It's been interesting. I was a guy who became, obsessed with politics about 20 years ago. And, I've seen some people say over the last month or so that, people be like, this Dave Smith guy came out of nowhere, which is, I'm sure, true from their perspective, but it is a little bit different from my perspective. Like 20 years doesn't feel like out of nowhere. But if you could try to imagine it from my perspective, it's a little bizarre when you've got these people who were like huge figures now coming after me, you know, all these years later. Like, it's a little surreal, but it's also been, you know, I think I've talked about this dynamic in the past. And I really felt it when I debated Dennis Prager. When I remember going into that debate, and you know, I debated a bunch of people on Israel already at the point, but I debated like Laura Loomer and Austin Peterson and these people who were like, they just don't really know anything. They're not readers, you know, and they're like it was just kind of like my depth of knowledge on the issue just far surpassed theirs, and that's just very clear to anyone who watches the debate. And when I was debating Dennis Prager, I just kind of felt this pressure. Like, I was like, this guy, I've been watching this guy on TV since I was a kid. I remember watching him on Politically Incorrect, Bill Maher's old show. Well, I must have been like 16 years old or something like that. The guy has been doing a radio show since I was born. Like, he's my entire life, and this is his number one issue. And so I remember feeling this pressure going into the debate, like, okay, I better be on point. I'm debating a guy who's been doing this my entire life, and I'm debating him on his number one issue, you know? And then, like, right as the debate started, it was during his opening statement, I was just like, oh, and I had this realization, and then I was just calm for the rest of the thing. And the realization was just simply that he had nothing. Like, I just couldn't even believe it. It was like, oh, he has nothing. He has no argument to present. And of course, the same has been true in all the big debates since then. I'm just kind of blown away by how much, they don't actually have an argument. And that was kind of how I felt as this happened. But anyway, Mark Levin, I guess, still has a radio show, and I'm sure there are a decent amount of 80-year-olds who still listen to it. But I don't know. You've, I'm sure, known who Mark Levin is over the years, Rob, right?
So I used to very occasionally listen to Mark Levin on the radio, and I mean, very occasionally. We're talking about in the years where I was not following politics, but every once in a while I'd be bored on the radio, happened to be in the car, I think at 7 p.m., and the first 10 minutes of Mark Levin, before he started taking calls, he had something interesting to say. It was usually rooted in his constitutional analysis, and I just thought his voice was hilarious. Like, if I was doing a cartoon where you're supposed to turn on the radio and hear someone screaming about war, that's the voice I would cast. And it was always a constant, and Mr. President, it's an outrage, and that's just the voice that should be coming out of your radio, pitching to you that the president's ruining the country and we need to be fighting a war.
It's like if you had to draw a picture of who that guy should be and create a voice of who it would be, that voice. Anyway, Mark Levin has been a long time right-wing radio talk radio host, has a show on Fox News. He's one of the biggest right-wing radio guys. And for a long time, obviously Rush Limbaugh was always the biggest. And him and Hannity, I think, were fighting it out for like the number 2 spot in right-wing radio for a long time. But for a long time, this is kind of forgotten now, but right-wing radio was the only game in town for critics of liberals. And then obviously Fox News blew up, but it was kind of like these terms that they're kind of sound like dinosaur artifacts or something now, but like, the liberal media. And so which was true, but it wasn't just the news. It was everything. Like all TV and movies were made in New York or LA. And so they always inherently just reflected a kind of cultural, political bias. If you like grew up around my age, like I'm 42, when you grew up, even the big shows, like things outside of politics, but like Seinfeld or Friends or something like that, it was all of the characters. There was no religious person. No one ever believed in God. There was never a thing about. No one went to church. No one went to temple. They all had sex out of wedlock. They all, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was just like, culturally speaking, it was not a conservative world. It was a very secular, liberal world. And so right-wing radio became kind of like the thing that they had. That was one of their very few outlets. And so he was one of the big guys in that, and is still around. I don't know. I don't know like what his ratings are these days, but it's not, I'm sure, what it used to be. But anyway, he's a part of that kind of neocon war hawk. He's a George W. Bush conservative, and of course, staunchly pro-Israel, and shockingly, not a huge fan of me. Never saw that coming. Okay. Anyway, let's get into this and respond to a little bit of our boy here, Mark Levin.
Now broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
All right, can you pause it already for a second? I didn't even realize this is in here. Man, how much did podcasts just expose how stupid radio is? Isn't it just dumb? You know, you really don't need any of that.
I remember that intro from 20 years ago. That's funny that it's still going.
That is something. It's always, why was there in radio? First of all, I know, like, I've done radio a lot over the years, like at Sirius studios and stuff. And it is, first of all, it's so short. There's commercials all the time. You just talk for like a few minutes and then they're like, okay, take a break. And then there's always this like, we're back and the kids in the cat, blah, 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 blah. Like, why you're just cutting into our time. No one tunes in to listen to that. Okay, I'm sorry, I should do this. Let's keep playing.
America, Mark Levin here. Our number 877-381-3811, 877-381-3811. I want to thank you for being here. Greatest audience of all audiences. Now I'm here 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, Mr. Producer. 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. And that's just on radio. So a schmuck picks a fight with me. Doesn't call me. He's got this sidekick, sort of I don't even know who this guy Smith is. What was his guess? He's not like an Ed McMahon figure or something? I don't know why all these big-time smart hosts always have to have a sidekick or somebody or a guest. Guess that's what they need. Neoconservatives, ladies and gentlemen, as I was briefly stating, these were mostly, it is sort of a nebulous term, or was, but you can see it would be like the Weekly Standard, where Chatsworth Osborne Jr. actually worked with his good friend Bill Kristol. Didn't they find text or something where he called Trump a dumb F too, Mr. Peterson? Something like that. If I'm wrong, Chatsburn, you can put a footnote on that one. But he thinks he runs foreign policy in America. Anybody who disagrees with him has to be smeared. And he brings in these brilliant experts who rewrite World War II and the Holocaust, economists who know history, then apparently comedians who nobody's ever heard of. Certainly I haven't. But that's okay. That's his gig. He can do whatever he wants.
All right, let's pause it already for a second.
I don't even know.
Do you get my point about how shocking it is how they all have nothing? Like, just what is this? This is just unbelievable to me to watch. It's like all is that, yeah, I get it. No, I know. Listen, I think it's ridiculous too. I know. It's ridiculous that I'm just some comedian who you've never heard of, and yet I'm better at this than all of you. It's insane. I also think it's crazy. Now that we're over that, can you take on anything I said? Can you take on one argument? Why is it necessary every time for this constant poisoning of the well? I don't even know who this guy is. And then he has the nerve to start this off by saying anyone who disagrees with you on foreign policy needs to be smeared. Well, what exactly are you doing? What is this? What is it necessary to open up with I guess a comedian knows about history and I don't even know his name. I don't even know who he is. Like, okay. All right. It's like they all have to pretend to not be able to remember the simplest name in the fucking world. Like every one of them, not one of you can get Dave right. Like not one of you can figure out Dave. It's a biblical name, Mark Levin. It's a pretty common one. The last one is like my last name's a little bit tricky. It's hard to pronounce, but it is just so isn't it kind of like I don't know. It's revealing in a sense. I mean, I've had so many of them now who have done this. They all, by the way, they're all smearing me simply because I disagree with them on foreign policy. That is the bottom. If I didn't, let's get real here. Mark Levin, Mr. Constitutional Conservative. If I saw eye to eye with you on war, you'd have nothing but great things to say about me. That's the truth. It's the whatever. It's this like dumb, most pathetic game, and it is like there's something that's there's like an irony or something where I'm the comedian podcaster, right? So like you're essentially the whole point, what is always the point, is like we're the professional people who talk about wars and cheerlead all of them. You're just some comedian podcaster. The argument being like that we're the serious professional people. You're like the class clown type character. And yet every single time I'm attempting to present arguments backed up by historical facts with sources, and they are playing Mean Girl games. Like it's the gayest shit I've ever seen in my life. Like they argue like 16-year-old girls. I just couldn't imagine ever showing up to any type of political debate or takedown or whatever you want to call this and starting with, no one even knows you. We don't even know your name. I don't even know your name. What is it? Some comedian guy? I mean, who even needs a sidekick? Why can't you just do it yourself? It's like sidekick. It was an interview. Interview? Is this like this is some novel like idea? I don't know. Anyway, Rob, I'm sorry if there's not much substance here, but what did he give me to contend with? But isn't it just something? It's just interesting how it always goes this same way.
And if you got 3 hours to fill with no sidekick, you can always replace it with long pauses.
Yeah. Well, also, by the way, you don't have 3 hours to fill. That's the other comment I was making at the beginning of that. You don't have 3 hours to fill. You have commercials, then it comes in, you have that sound graphic thing.
And
then
you
say
take 2 hours of calls. It's literally 30 minutes of Mark Levin up front, if even. And by the way, I forgot about calm Mark Levin. I only like yelling Mark Levin when he's getting worked up. This is the calm Mark Levin. That's not my impression.
It always that's right. It's one or the other. He goes 2 speeds, slow you down or jerk fast. But he's it's like you don't talk for 3 hours. You probably spend 20 minutes saying the phone number. They do that constantly in radio. They have to keep telling you the number over and over and over again. So anyway, whatever. And as you've already demonstrated, you fill a lot of it with fluff and zero substance. But okay, let's keep playing.
His platform, is it subscription rich? I don't know. It is. So he needs to have hits. He needs subscribers. That's all well and good. I believe in capitalism too. But that said, reading is fundamental. We have this site Mediaite, which is really a low-life bunch of morons. And quote me on that, will you, for once, Mediaite? Low-life bunch of morons. Prepubescent, low IQ individuals who actually don't produce any substance, but take the words of other people, slap headlines on them, and in many cases, twist them out of context. So the other day they said I called
one more time.
The Envoy.
But let's pause it right here because he's about to get into it. Obviously, me and Tucker talked about his comments about Witkoff on the show. But I will say this. I found this to be hilarious. What he's saying about Mediaite, and I'm not like a very regular, a few times I've clicked on their videos, and like they're one of the sites that's out there. He's right that they're an aggregate, like they just take content from other things and then run, like it's not really a story. They're just kind of like, story, Tucker Carlson said this on his podcast, and you're like, you could just go to the podcast, like you don't really need it. But that's their business model. Without any comment on that business model, I just found it hilarious that Mediaite ran this. Like I thought that was the ultimate like response. Mediaite just did it again with this content. It's like no matter how much you try to fight them, they're like, great article right there. So they just post this video. This is why I saw it. It was from Mediaite. Or you sent it to me, Rob, actually at first, but it was a Mediaite link. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny. Okay, let's get into the substance here.
Twist them out of context. So the other day they said I called the envoy a traitor in the title. And then in the body of the piece, they said he essentially called him a traitor. I never called him a traitor. I know how to say traitor. I know how to write traitor. So in comes Chatworth Osborne Jr. And hold on, I got to find exactly what I wrote here. I should ask him because he wrote it down. He thought it was so important. Oh, speaking of the envoy who talked about the neocon element, and I'm guessing he used that phrase because he has no idea what it means. You see, all the neoconservatives are dead. They were old-time Democrats who abandoned the Democrat Party and were hawks when it came to foreign policy. And many of them were quite brilliant. Scoop Jackson, Patrick Moynihan, Gene Kirkpatrick. And as I said, Chatsworth Osborne Jr. was of that ilk, or part of that ilk, as a senior writer, maybe even an editor, at the non-existent now Crystal magazine. Fox News' Mark Levin ripped Witkoff, you see. Called him a traitor. I never called him a traitor. In fact, I never would call him a traitor. But he posts this, and then I posted this. By the way, neocon is a pejorative for Jew. Unbelievable. You see, all the neocons are gone. So why do they keep using the word neoconservative? Notice they don't use hawk, interventionist, neocon. Why do they keep saying neocon? Because many of the neoconservatives were old-time left-wing Democrat Jews.
Can we just pause here for a second?
Sure.
Chatsworth knows it.
You see, this to me is all right. I'm going to be the gay Jew on this one and say,
all right,
this to me is dangerous for Jews, because when you say a neocon, you're criticizing the idea of pro-war individuals. And now you could probably get into the history better than I can of who were the neocons and the damage that they've done to this country. I'm not as intelligent. I don't know the history. You say the word neocon, and I'm thinking of the largely conservative individuals who are always looking for and preaching for war. There is no affiliation to Jewish people when I hear that word. That's not what people are criticizing. If they wanted to criticize, hey, there's an issue with Jewish people, then they're jumping into anti-Semitism, and now you're saying Jews, and that's not even necessarily an affiliation with war. You could say all of these Jews who are pitching war. When you say the word neocon, you're conveying one thing, which is I am actually just calling them the title of the group of people that are very pro-war and advocate for war. And that almost became an insult to people of, oh, you're just a neocon, because they were so wrong and they led us to so many disastrous wars that it almost becomes embarrassing to have the title neocon, because now you're easily dismissed and being within this category that was so drastically wrong on so many things and just likes war. But when you say the word neocon, it has zero affiliation with Jewish people until someone like Mark Levin steps in and goes, oh, the Jews are so highly affiliated with being pro-war in this country, then when you say neocon, you're actually trying, no one had this affiliation until I'm hearing it introduced here. And now you're actually actively affiliating Jewish ideas and Jewish people with the horrible war machine of our country that people are actually trying to criticize.
Right. Well, okay. So that, I think that's exactly right. He's also just wrong when he says all the neocons are
it's
dead.
The Israel anti-Semitism thing. He's trying to hide behind he's trying to hide behind not having an argument for his ideas and instead dismissing people that want to criticize the actual ideas of being pro-war as, oh, you're just being anti-Semitic or you're just being anti-Jew, which then allows him to not actually have an argument over the issues that he's probably wrong about but would like to preach to you.
Right, exactly. So just to be clear here, because this is something that's quite funny about it, right? Like this was in my debate with Douglas Murray, as many of you saw, at one point I said something about neoconservatives and he said, the N-word, and then went on. Like, he wrote a book called Neoconservatism, Why We Need It. So this is not, how there are like terms like, I never liked this one, I never used it, but do you remember the branch Covidians was a term that people used? It was a term for the COVID insane lockdown. The reason I didn't like the term because like the branch Davidians weren't the bad guys in that story. So I didn't like, you know what I'm saying? Like the bad guys were the ATF and the FBI, not the Davidians. Anyway, but you'd kind of come up with a term for like, say, the people who wanted to lock down the country. And then you use that as a pejorative because they were wrong about everything and it had a disastrous consequence when their policy was implemented. This is something different. This is their term. This is what they called themselves. They self-identified as neoconservatives. Okay, and they wrote books and books and books and articles, and they had think tanks, and this is what they called themselves. Now, when he says the old neocons, the neocons are all dead. No. The first generation of them are dead. Those guys really did not get much political power. Almost all of the neoconservatives are still alive. Now, it is true that, for example, like Irving Kristol is dead, but Bill Kristol is still alive. Norman Podhoretz is dead, but John Podhoretz is still alive. And calling Thomas Massie anti-Semitic filth for saying we're $36 trillion in debt, we can't afford to fund Israel's war. So there's still, but look, it is true that somewhere along the line, neoconservative just kind of became a pejorative for war hawks. It's kind of, maybe there's a comparison there, but it's kind of like the word woke. Now, woke and the term social justice warrior, these were self-descriptors at first. Like the people who were woke called themselves woke. Then it became a pejorative. These days, if you hear the term woke used, you're almost always hearing it as an insult towards somebody. But okay, you don't get to just say the word is offensive when you embraced the word. Like, I'm sorry, this is too goofy. And so, okay, there were a lot of self-described neoconservatives. They were not all Jewish, although disproportionately there were a lot of Jews involved. But there were people like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and there were always people in the group who were not Jewish, but they agreed with their views on foreign policy, which, as Mark Levin said, were extremely hawkish. Now, what happened is that the neoconservatives, the self-described neoconservatives, they hijacked U.S. foreign policy in the George W. Bush administration. So they were really the ones calling the shots right after 9/11. And it's the greatest tragedy of the 21st century that they were in positions of power at this time. And they're the ones who launched the war on terrorism. And this, now, it is true that of the self-described neoconservatives, a lot of them are no longer in power. Now, some of them are not that far from being out of power. Of course, the architect of the entire catastrophe in Ukraine was Victoria Nuland, who was hired by Dick Cheney and then promoted by Hillary Clinton. And this is the wife of Robert Kagan. who was a Project for a New American Century, self-described neoconservative. So no, it's not like, oh, this is ancient history. None of them have been around. They're all dead. That's just a lie. But it is true that essentially, while Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and the guys from the Project for a New American Century, with the exception of Robert Kagan's wife, who was just in power until Donald Trump came back in, it's true most of them aren't in power anymore, but the policy continued nonetheless. And somewhere along the line, neocon became a pejorative for the guys trying to get us into the next stupid war. But this term was applied, and look, you could argue like this term was applied to people who don't self-describe as neocons, but it was applied to people like John McCain or Lindsey Graham, who were not self-identified neocons, but had foreign policy that was indistinguishable from the neoconservatives. By the way, both John McCain and Lindsey Graham, not Jewish, but people still throw the term out at them because they're stupid war hawks. There's like, it's ridiculous to say that this term is off limits because now, which is what essentially all of them are doing, right? Is that they like the neocon agenda, but they know that the term neocon is kind of associated with catastrophe. And so they're like, hey, stop using that word that we used to use. It's like people like Mark Levin, right? Defended the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm sure was critical. I mean, I don't know enough about him, but I'm sure was critical of Obama for not being harsher or for not being more of a hawk. And, it's like, okay, but like, no, I'm sorry, because essentially what they're saying here, on top of like your point is completely right, Rob, but on top of just this thing where you're making it a Jewish thing when it's not, or not entirely at least, it's also a desperate attempt to get away from your own track record, to be like, no, we don't talk about that anymore. You're not allowed to have a word that you use to dismiss all of us based off of our history of disaster. That's, the funny thing is that none of them even have a response to that. They can sit there and say what they will about, I'm just a comedian, or I don't know what I'm telling you. It's like, oh, okay, all that stuff, fine. You can pretend to not know my name. I don't really give a shit. As Mark Levin said at one point there, he goes, I like capitalism. He kind of threw this weird little insult at Tucker. Oh, he has a subscription model. I guess that means he needs subscribers. Like, yeah, and you have a radio show. You need listeners. What are you talking about? We're all in the same business. But if you are a capitalism guy, that means that, kind of the market gets to determine whose voice ought to be heard. So I don't really give a shit if you know my name or not, because I'm winning in the marketplace. Like, who cares what you think? What matters is the argument. And the fact is that the war on terrorism cost the American taxpayer $8 trillion. It destabilized our country. It has led to the worst tribal, political, cultural, and racial divides of my lifetime. It slaughtered around, I think the estimates are around 4 million people were killed in the wars. It destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Yemen. It has resulted in thousands of our brave young soldiers being killed in action. Tens of thousands of them have been injured in action. Tens of thousands of them have committed suicide in the wake of the wars. And there's not one theater in where all of these wars have happened that you could say is better off now than it was before. That's their legacy. And you might notice none of them have a response to that. Not a single one of them. But when I said it to Douglas Murray, he said, okay, that is a fair point. He's got no response to that. And that's why they rely on smearing anybody who opposes them, because forget all the other stuff. This was your track record. You were for these policies. These policies were enacted. This is the result. And part of the result is now the term neocon means evil, psychotic, retarded, blood-soaked monster war hawk who ruins everything he touches. Deal with it. We're not going to stop calling you that. Okay. All right. Let's keep playing.
I know it. And many of the people that use that phrase either don't know what they're talking about, but in the magazines and on the internet, they know it. So they're not going to say the Jews are dragging us into a war. They'll say Israel is, Netanyahu is. They're not going to say the Jews this and the Jew. So they use neocon. Chatsworth is smart enough to know what he's doing.
Let's pause it for a second. So your criticism is that they're more precise, and that they don't just blame all Jews. That's your no. A lot of people out there do say the Jews are just dragging us into all of these wars. Those are the ones who are Jew haters. Okay. Other people who are more precise and more accurate say, hey, these people are dragging us into a war. Like, did they not drag us into a war? Have we not been dragged into wars in the last 25 years? Okay, there were people who were making decisions in positions of power. And no, it's not just Jews. There's lots of non-Jews in that group as well. And so your beef with us is that we're using a more precise term that also incorporates the non-Jewish war hawks into this. What? Yes, the Israeli government and the neoconservatives have been hell-bent on dragging America into war, and they've been largely successful in that effort. Them's the facts, Mark Levin. Sorry. I know there's supposed to be this like unwritten agreement that we're never supposed to talk about the warfare state. But we're never supposed to like mention that's a fact in American political life also. But we're never, I don't know, we're all supposed to be constitutional conservatives who don't mention that the Congress hasn't declared a war since World War II. But that doesn't fuck with you at all, Mark Levin? Being in a state of forever war, all of them being undeclared wars, you never read something from the founders that indicated maybe this was not the original intent of Article 1, Section 8? And give me a fucking break. So anyway, yeah. So you're anti-Semitic for saying the neocons drag us into war because you really want to say the Jews drag us into war, but you don't. I don't know. What can you say about this? It's too ridiculous. It's like me being like, the Bloods and the Crips sure have killed a lot of people in Chicago. And then someone going, oh, that's a pejorative for black people. So you really want to say black people are killing a bunch of people in Chicago, but you just keep saying the Bloods and Crips because no, that's so I'm not being racist. I'm being specific. Can you defend the actions of the Bloods and the Crips? No. Let me tell you something. It's easier than defending the actions of the neocons. Killed a lot less people. All right, let's keep playing.
He may have transitioned into what he's become today, but he knows what he's doing. I know what he's doing. Now, when I wrote this, by the way, neocon is a pejorative for Jew. Unbelievable. Mr. Producer, does that say I called the envoy an anti-Semite? You're either stupid or diabolical to suggest that I did. Take your pick.
Okay. So
I'm no fan of the envoy.
So after all of this, by the way, it talks about he talks for 3 hours. It's like, yeah, you take a long time to make a point. And then your point is the most garbage point I've ever heard. I mean, this is why the whole like woke right debate and all of that. All I'm saying is like, forget even whether you like the term or not. I think the people lobbing it my way have so discredited the term that it's useless at this point. But like, you do get, this guy might as well be a gender studies major. The way he's arguing, it's literally like it's identical to what the woke left used to do all the time. They used to say these things where they'd be like, they talk about like toxic masculinity or toxic whiteness. There was that book, The Case of White Fragility or something like that. And then people would be like, it sounds like you're a racist who hates white people. And they'd be like, where did I say that? When did I say that? No, I didn't say anything about white people. I said whiteness. And you're like, yeah, dude, well, I mean, what? It's the same. So yes, okay. You're right, Mark Levin. You didn't call Trump's envoy an anti-Semite. You said he was using an anti-Semitic trope, right? You said neocon is a pejorative for Jew. So you said he's using a pejorative for Jew. But then to sit there and go like, only an idiot would have thought I called him an anti-Semite is like, oh, shut up, dude. Like, what do you think this is cute? This is the dumbest game I've ever heard. Yes, I can't believe people made that mistake in assuming that you called him an anti-Semite when you just said he's being an anti-Semite. Whatever. It's just too ridiculous.
This white store owner shoved blacks out of his store, and that's a racist action. Oh, I never said the owner was a racist. I just said the action that he engaged in was racist.
Yeah, come on. This is just, it's ridiculous. All right, let's keep playing.
But I never called him a traitor. I know how to say traitor, and I never called him an anti-Semite. And this is really precious coming from our friend Chatsworth Osborne Jr., who's brought in a conga line, of miscreants, malcontents, and worse, in my opinion. And I say this as a red-blooded American, that a lot of people are getting sick and tired of this game. They're getting turned off by this. The American people do not want the Islamo-Nazi regime in Iran to get a nuclear weapon. They don't want them to have missile technology where they can put a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental ballistic missile and hit the United States. And the fact that they don't want that doesn't make them a warmonger, a neocon, or anything else. It makes them patriotic Americans. That's number one. Number two, I am hoping, you are hoping, that Donald Trump figures out some kind of deal that nobody else has figured out yet, but he's capable of it, to stop them, short of war. But many of us are skeptical. Why? Because we have a brain, because we know the Islamo-Nazi regime in Tehran is a terrorist regime that has violated every piece of paper it's ever signed. That's why we're at the 11th hour. That's why Donald Trump's having to deal with it. We know what terrorism means as much as we know what neocon means. So if you're trying to stop the Iranian regime, which chants day in and day out, death to America, death to America, death to America, and tries to assassinate our president, you're not a warmonger, you're a peacemaker. That's what you are. You're not a neocon. The neocons are...
Okay. So, I mean, wow. First off, he starts going into the Mark Levin voice that Rob likes. So here, now we're getting the real Levin here. And holy shit. It's like once they get through all the bullshit and actually present their argument, it is just the dumbest fucking Dick Cheney bullshit you've ever heard. Like, it's all just so, like, who even believes this hyperbolic nonsense anymore? Iran is going to nuke the United States of America with the nuke that they don't have and the delivery capabilities they do not possess. This is on the level of Saddam Hussein is about to hand WMDs to the terrorists. This is the propaganda that got us into Iraq. That Saddam Hussein is about to hand this weapon that he doesn't own over to the terrorists who he's not friends with. There's the Islamo-Nazis. Oh, it's just fucking pathetic. No, Mark Levin, no. The American people, the red-blooded Americans, including, by the way, the military that you need in order to go fight these wars, the American people are sick of war. And they do not want to fight another war on behalf of Israel. This is borne out across all the opinion polls. And not just the opinion polls, it's the military guys themselves, as I always love to say on the show. But in 2008 and 2012, at the height of the war on terrorism, the candidate who got more money from active duty military than all other candidates combined was Dr. Ron Paul. Because no, the American people don't go, oh my God, there's a bunch of Nazis in Iran. We just have to go to war with them. Actually, the American people aren't even thinking about that shit. The American people are thinking about how America has had a rough go of it over the last few years. That's what they're thinking about. Again, this is borne out in all of the opinion polls. All of the opinion polls, Rob. You know what? We just had I don't know if you recall, Rob, we had a presidential election over this last year. There were a bunch of opinion polls. And at the top of the issues, when the issues that people were voting on was, will Iran get a nuke or not? That was the number one. Oh, no. I'm sorry. It was the economy and immigration. Because people care about their country. Kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense. You know, some of us have kids and our kids are growing up in this country. So we care about what's good for this country. You know, I was watching the other day, yesterday, I saw a clip of Michael Knowles, who's over at the Daily Wire. And it's kind of interesting. It's interesting watching the dynamic of Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles because, you know, they're kind of taking the non-interventionist approach while still never criticizing Israel because, you know, they got an audience that they got to keep, but then they also got a job that they got to keep. So they're caught in this kind of weird spot. And at one point, Michael Knowles is saying, he's like, look, you know, I've heard a lot of people make arguments, but no one's really made a convincing argument to me of why Israel doesn't have a right to go to war over October 7th. Now, leaving that aside, because I think a lot of people, including myself, made pretty damn convincing arguments about why Israel doesn't have a right to do what they're doing, but whatever. That's what he says. And then at a point in it, it's almost like he just says it without really thinking of the implication. But he goes, look, I want the war to end tomorrow. Just like as an American, I think it's better and it's in our interest for the war to end. I mean, it's just causing all types of problems, you know, but still Israel has a right to do this. And then you're almost like, you're like, oh, wait, hold on. But so you just subtly admitted that even from your point of view, it's in America's interest for the war to stop. So you're telling me we got to fund and arm a war that is against our interests? Give me a break with this bullshit, Mark Levin. You know why? Listen, man, Mark Levin has a 40-year head start on me in this game. Literally, I bet he's been doing it since I was 2 years old. Okay? And he has tens of millions of dollars, and he works for billion-dollar companies and is syndicated all across the country. And in the marketplace, I have not only caught but beat him due to one simple fact. The American people are not where you are. They're just not. It's borne out in every single opinion poll that you can find. The American people do not recognize that the Islamo-Nazis are our biggest concern. And the American people recognize that, like, you know, people pouring into the country by the millions illegally, that's our big concern. That are losing the purchasing power of our dollar, that's our big concern. Why are we losing all this purchasing power in our dollar? Well, a big part of it is we've spent $10 trillion on maintaining an empire over the last 25 years. Had to print a lot of money to make up for that. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Moink, a great company. They've been a longtime sponsor of this podcast. And I think in a lot of ways, the country has kind of caught up to where Moink's been for a long time. I don't know about you guys. I do not trust the meat that is at the supermarket. Even the ones that say, you know, they're organic or say they're this or that, you just never really know where that stuff's coming from. But now you don't have to worry about any of that because you could just go right to Moink and then you get your meat directly from family farms. Their business is simple. Moink meat comes from animals raised outdoors where a pig is free to be a pig. Their farmers are given an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, and they deliver meat straight to your doorstep at prices you can actually afford. I've been getting this stuff for a while. The meat is absolutely delicious, and it's very convenient that they deliver it right to you. Support American family farms and join the Moink movement today at moinkbox.com/POTP right now, and you get free wings for life. These are the best wings you will ever taste for free, but only for a limited time. They've had a lot of giveaways. This is the best one that they've done since they've been sponsoring us. So go check them out at moinkbox.com/POTP. That's moinkbox.com/POTP and get free wings for life. All right, let's get back into the show. So no, Mark Levin, the people are not with you. And I'll say on top of that, the people, by and large, don't hate Jews. They just hate forever wars. I'll give you the final thoughts on this, Rob, and then I know you do.
I have to
run.
cut out for a call, but I encourage you to keep on going because I feel like Mark Levin deserves more trashing here, and you're doing an excellent job.
All right. Thank you, sir. We will talk to you guys. Make sure to go check out Run Your Mouth. Go to theporchtour.com. Okay. Let's keep playing. I'll do another few minutes on this without Rob. Let's keep playing.
They're dead. Now, people use neocon. Many people innocently, they don't know what it means. He knows what it means. And my point to our envoy was, why are you using a word like that? Because you don't even know what it means, as do others. And so the point was to let him know that it's a pejorative. What it's a pejorative war, and it's unbelievable that he spews it. And he'll keep spewing it, and others will too. But I don't have to pretend I'm Helen Keller, that I don't see and I don't hear, and neither do you. And neither do you. And there's a whole pattern over there with Chatsworth Osborne Jr. A whole pattern. Now, he's free to do what he wants. I believe in free speech. Go ahead, buy a subscription. Do whatever you want. It's perfectly fine by me. But don't screw with me, you little bastard. By twisting my words.
All right, let's
You
pause it
should have
right
picked
there.
up the phone.
Don't screw with Mark Levin. Or what? Or what, you old soft man? What are you gonna do? Launch the dumbest rant I've ever heard? Listen, Steve Witkoff knows exactly what the term neoconservative means, and more important than that, he knows what it means in common parlance. Like, he knows what it means today. What he means is war hawk. Yes, it's a pejorative for war hawks, because Witkoff is trying his best, it seems, to make peace around the world. And, okay, it's not going perfectly, but actually he's had some very real, very tangible success. Saved some human beings' lives. Again, as I know this is a running theme on the show at this point, but isn't it interesting how none of them seem to care about that? Isn't that so goddamn fascinating that me here as the self-hating Jew Hamas sympathizer, or whatever the fuck I get called on Twitter, I'm the one who's celebrating that 20 hostages got returned over the last few months. 21, when you count the American. But so yes, he knows. Again, woke, like the term woke, which is what I made the analogy. It first started as like a black consciousness term. It started as like black people. The idea was to get woke, to wake up to like the systemic oppression and the kind of false narratives that have been created. And then, as is typically the case, it started in the black community, and then a bunch of white liberals were like, "Oh, that's cool. We want it," and so they took it. And then they did really, really stupid things with it, like argue that gender is made up and all types of ridiculous stuff. And now it's a pejorative used to smear that. But if anyone were to say to you, they go, "You don't even know what the term means. The term means black consciousness." It's like, nah, it once did. It doesn't anymore. It's the way words work. Language evolves like that. And yes, the term neocon is now just a pejorative for warhawk, because you guys have lost the fucking argument. That's the truth. There's a real irony in the whole, last month, and the whole nonsense about like experts and, you've never been and all that ridiculous stuff. It's like, look, I will be the first to admit it's true. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. There should be better people. There should be better people. It's just that you guys suck so much that I can fuck all of you up. This is why I wreck these guys every time they're willing to debate, to the point that I don't think too many of them are going to be willing to debate anymore. There's someone was trying to set, it was Josie, the redheaded libertarian on Twitter. She was trying to set up a debate on the woke right. And between me and James Lindsay, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do it. And he was like, no, they're not doing that. And of course not. Why would they? Is none of you guys have lost the fucking argument because your argument is built off lies and blood. That's it. No one's going to stop using neocon as a pejorative because Mark Levin threatened them. Keep ranting. Keep your dumb rants coming. Please, it's just more content. Please keep them coming. Sorry, you guys, listen, say what you will about me. There's far more educated people than me. I've read like everything the neocons have ever fucking written. I know all the shit they wrote in the Project for a New American Century. I know their whole clean break strategy, their whole 7 countries in 5 years strategy. Read everything they've written. And you don't get to walk away from that now, especially people like Mark Levin who fucking supported it from a position of power. You know, there's somebody having a real influence. One of the biggest right-wing talk radio show hosts in the country. You supported every one of these catastrophic wars. And now that they've all ended in disaster, you got to deal with being called a neocon for it. So fuck neocons, and we're never going to stop saying that word. Okay. That's the show for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. I do appreciate it. I'll see some of you guys out there at the Soho Forum tomorrow night. Really looking forward to it. Catch you guys tomorrow. Peace.